coming to wrap things up for today. It's been a great day. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Give yourself a hand. And so why doesn't everybody stand up real quick? Can I stretch up a little bit? This is a trick I have to give Mike a standing ovation. So give him a... So just give you some details for the rest of the day. So after interview Mike, we have Jeff Hoffman, which is a treat. So you want to hear his perspective on the world. Amazing entrepreneur, amazing guy. Then after Jeff, my daughter Maggie and Josh are going to do 3 numbers from My Pet Dragon at around 5 o'clock, and then they'll have the reception immediately following that. Sound like a plan? Yeah, we appreciate you being here. So let's kick things off. So,
Michael.
It's become Michael as I've gotten older.
You didn't do your Mike and Michael joke with your mother said, so I guess I'm the plumber. You want to tell your joke?
So people always ask me, is my name Mike or is it Michael? And I say, well, my mother said the name Michael is from the Bible. Your name's Michael. You know, Mikes are bowlers and butchers. But guess what my mother calls me? Mike.
So I'll be Mike here.
So anyway, you and I wrote a book a couple years ago called Mission Corporation. What in the world were you thinking?
So Michael was on the board of my company, BizEquity, which we sold to American City Business Journals. And the mission of BizEquity was and is to democratize business valuation for private business owners that couldn't afford to know what their business was worth. And Michael, while we wrote the book, really, I think the premise of it was Michael was the best and most vocal board member I had on the team. And we had an amazing investor who was no longer with us, passed away, and the person that took over was very different from the amazing investor. And Michael and I would talk about it, and I was like, you know, I'm a total capitalist, and we probably are similar politically, but something happened. Like, what happened a little bit to capitalism, especially in earlier stage technology companies where human capital is so important, we saw a big change in that. So I think we started riffing on the book, probably thinking about the idea of it a year before COVID. And then when COVID hit, we were doing these, Mike and I probably touch base every day or every other day, and we're like, let's really do this book. Because I think, in talking to Andrew in the audience, Andrew Sachs, I think it was this idea that during COVID, I think we've all had that time where you step back and you reflect on your life and your mission, and that Mark Twain quote that Michael showed today about your purpose in life is really to find your mission. And it was like, well, how can we really make businesses instruments of change or the virtue that we want it to represent? And that became the basis for the book.
It helped to have Zoom that recorded everything we said.
What's this?
It would help to have Zoom that you could record every word that you said.
Totally.
So you sort of recorded a book. So I know you don't like to talk about yourself, but you've been an entrepreneur. You've founded multiple software companies. You worked with the legendary, one of the original venture capitalists, Pete Musser. First of all, what did you learn from him? And along with that, what have you seen change from the way that Pete operated, and maybe some of the changes that have taken place with terms of how capital interacts with founders?
Totally. So Pete Musser, amazing person. He founded East Coast Venture Capital, really. And he used his company as kind of a vessel for what he wanted to represent. And his company was called Safeguard Scientifics. So he was really the first publicly traded private equity or venture fund. And what he would do with the portfolio companies is for every 10 shares you owned of New York Stock Exchange Safeguard Scientifics at the time, you would get 1 share of any of these fledgling companies that he would invest in. And some of the stories through the years, I was super blessed. The first company I worked for and learned from was called Cambridge Technology Partners, which was a management and technology consulting company. And Pete was the chairman. So I would read about Pete in undergrad and grad school and say, oh my God, that would be amazing, but I'll never meet him. And I ended up working at a company that he was chairman of, so I was able to meet him, and he became a lifelong mentor, much like Michael's big mentor was Bill Campbell, who was on the board at Google and chairman of Intuit and Apple. And so Michael had this amazing mentor with Bill Campbell. I was blessed to have this amazing mentor with Pete Musser. And Pete really taught me that there was kind of humanity in business, that business is like such a creative vehicle to really harness everything that you want to do in your life and do it through the companies that, in his case, that he invested in. And what we wanted to do is kind of in the companies that we would invest in or help create in the sense of BizEquity. So lessons from Pete, one of them was every portfolio company that he would invest in or help create, there would always have to be 10% of the company left over for team members or employees. So every employee had at least one share of stock. And that really resonated with me. And hence, when we talk about it later, that became one of our declarations in our 7 declarations in the book. And so I think and the second thing why I created BizEquity was a question he would always ask a founder of a company. At the end of hearing their pitch on their company, he would say to them, well, what do you think your business is worth? And I was always blown away that regardless of how confident, we'll say, the entrepreneur was when he or she came in, or the stage of the business, the entrepreneur would always struggle answering that question. So that's why I created BizEquity at the time to help solve that question. But so Pete was immense for me and was like a second father for me.
So BizEquity.com,
Yes.
Exactly what does BizEquity do?
So you're all familiar with Zillow? Show of hands. So in a sense, it's Zillow, but for businesses. So if you're all like me, whether it's Zillow or Trulia, even if I have no way I'm going to move to a certain part of the country or whatever, it's interesting to go in, figure out what the homes are worth in that neighborhood, and kind of go with your mind to that area. Well, similarly, what we wanted to do with BizEquity was this ability to help any business owner figure out what their business is worth. So imagine operating in the real estate market without having any MLS directory of what a business or what a home sold for. But that's exactly what still goes on today for businesses. So it's really the quality of your advisor and the information you have to know what your business is worth. And when I was working with and for Pete Musser, we looked at a company in upstate New York, and I remember it was called Power Up, and it was a lithium-ion battery maker. And I remember asking the business owners what they thought their business was worth. And they were in their 60s, pretty successful people, and one looked at the other and kind of shrugged and said, I don't know, 2 to 3 times. And I said, 2 to 3 times what? And they said, earnings. And the real reality of what that business was worth, because there was a lot of technology in it, it was like 2 to 3 times revenue, 8 to 10 times earnings. So I remember thinking, how is it possible that these, pretty smart people had no clue what their business was worth? And I think it's because there wasn't a resource and they didn't have the proper advisors to help them. So if you're over $100 million or you have GSV Ventures or GSV invest in your company and you're a tech company, you know what your business is worth. But if you're like 31 million businesses in America, let's say 6 million, between $500,000 and $10 million, so there's 6 million of those, they have no clue. 98% of them don't know what their business is worth. So that was the idea of BizEquity and how it was given birth. And then now we're part of, I think somebody's here from the Dallas Business Journals. I know Whitney Shaw's here, the CEO of American City Business Journals, but we're part of American City Business Journals because they're across the United States in 45 of the markets, and they can really help us blow out that message and use a bullhorn to get to the business owners and the advisors that serve them. So that's BizEquity.
So they use BizEquity to value your business?
Yes.
Okay, how was it?
Not enough. No. I think Whit asked me that question during the diligence phase like 3 or 4 years ago. I said, what does BizEquity say? I said, not enough.
So talk about the Mission Corporation book. What are some of the key principles, and maybe touch on the 7 declarations?
Yeah, so what Michael and I wanted to do is, who's familiar with B corporations or B Corps? Yeah. So super great, initiative, super great movement. There's the certified B movement. What B Corps did was really lay out the idea that your business should be about stakeholders, and stakeholders are more than just the founder of the company, but it's your community and so on and so forth. So it gave guidance, I think, on wording. And what Michael and I wanted to do was kind of give guidance on actions, to provide a framework, to provide a system for how you could create a company that maybe matters, that's not, it's capitalism plus. And so we created 7 declarations. So the top, I think the first 3 are probably the most important. So the first one is, there's a stated mission or purpose of your company beyond dollars and cents. And there's a practicality to that too, not just a humanitarian mission to that. There was a great book by the founder of Kyocera, a South Korean entrepreneur, Inamori, I think was his last name, and he had a book called A Passion for Success. And he talks about the fact that if you create a company with the sole purpose of just making money, you're not going to be successful. A month after Michael and I, or not, maybe 6 months after we wrote the book, there was a book that came out called Deep Purpose by a Harvard Business School professor who said he was writing a book on growth investing, and he said, if you would have told me I was going to write a book about purpose, I would have told you you're nuts. He said, I'm a professor of growth investing or professor of valuation at Harvard. And he said, but what he determined was the companies that performed the best the last 20 years, I think outperformed the market by 15%, were those companies where there was a stated purpose or meaning beyond just the profit. So before that, right, our first declaration is there's a stated meaning or purpose of the business beyond dollars and cents. The second one is the Pete Musser principle, this idea that if you are a startup, now remember, it's really hard for, larger organizations or even, companies that have been around for a while to implement this. But if you're a startup, 10% of your company in the beginning should be allocated in a stock option pool. A lot of venture capitalists now write that into term sheets. We were a little ahead of it, but I think packaging 7 declarations with that being the second one is super important. And that's the idea that everybody feels that they have equity, true equity, in terms of the business, whether it's 1 share or 1 million shares. And I think we both think that 50 years from now, our kids or grandkids or your nephews or nieces will say, do you believe people expected people to work at startups or smaller companies without owning 1 share of stock? I think it's one of those things that you're going to look like 100 years from now, people are going to think, how did everyone get away with it? Again, not the larger companies, but the smaller companies. The third declaration is 3-2-1. So 3% of employee time, 2% of net income, 1% of either equity or earnings go to charities in their community. The 3% is employee time to help their communities or help certain charities. 2% is net income, and 1% is the shares or equity in the firm. So Mark Benioff from Salesforce, who's a friend of Michael's, he had the 1-in-1 program. We wanted to make it a little bigger and better, so ours is the 3-2-1 program. So those 3 declarations of the 7 are, I think, the most important and the most substantive in the book, The Mission Corporation, of these declarations.
So if you were to give people advice of how the best way that they could incorporate these principles into their business, how can they do that? And what's your vision for this mission movement? What would you love if, you were to wave a magic wand, what would this look like in 5 or 10 years?
So we had a fun panel earlier because it was supposed to be about brand, and I think I talked about tax policy for 1/5 of it. and I was with somebody a little more, our friend Jeff from Scotland, who was a little more socialist leaning. But so I think where we would really see this going is, so today, believe it or not, there's 562 million entrepreneurs in the world. We think it's going to 1 billion entrepreneurs by 2050. So it's the age of enlightenment really for entrepreneurialism. And with the, Michael's presentation earlier, Witt's panel earlier with Sherry, this idea of AI being the fastest trend, the giga trend that's ever happened, I think AI accelerates entrepreneurship because now you can do things better, faster, cheaper than you could ever do before. And more people, I think, are going to become entrepreneurs. So what Michael and I want to do with the Mission Corporation, this was kind of step one, was the book. Step two is what Michael's done with Catherine, Owen, Brent, and the team, and Peggy with doing this great event. Step three, I think, is there'll be pockets of money or capital to only invest in mission corporations or companies that are mission corporations. And I think that's so important. And then four, I do think, getting back to the tax policy point I made, if it's not the basis for why we did the book, and it's not, we don't want to virtue signal and base it upon just tax policy, but if there were incentives to enable entrepreneurs that if they were mission corporations, they would have lower capital gains or lower personal tax rate, you'd have more entrepreneurs becoming mission corporations. That's not why we would all do it, but I think the next generation, that's why a lot of folks would rush into it. So I think those are the four key layers the next 5 years.
So last question, just because we got to get Jeff up here.
Great. Jeff, if you've never seen him present, he's awesome. So I was so pleased. I think I begged him to go second so I could go first.
But just the last parting words of advice for the aspiring entrepreneurs out there that want to run a mission corporation and want to change the world for good. What would you suggest? What would you say to them?
So I'd say read the business journals, go to the GSV boot camp. So I would say, I don't think that, in order to win, I think the purpose has to be beyond just trying to create a company worth a lot of money, because it's not going to work, right? The purpose of your business should be your business. And it should be a product that does something that helps people do something they couldn't do before, that does something better, faster, cheaper than was done before. So I think so basically to build purpose into your business from literally the outset with the mission, one. Two, treat everybody as if they're part of the fabric of your company. So I think this, declaration number 2 about the 10% employee stock option plan, I think it's so important. And then 3, I think, is hopefully, right, establish a mission corporation where you're following these 7 declarations to get moving. And that would probably be my advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Michael.